An Arab man with a thick secret, and I fell for him. I came to the desert looking for an escape, a break from my routine, a chance to clear my mind. What I didn't expect was him, a man unlike any I'd ever met. Zaid was intense, mysterious, and clearly hiding something. The closer I got, the more I felt it. A thick secret lingering between us. One that could change everything. Would I dare to find out the truth? Or was it safer to walk away before it was too late? Like, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The desert stretched endlessly before me, golden waves of sand shimmering under the relentless sun. I had always dreamed of visiting the Middle East, of standing in the vast emptiness where history felt carved into every dune. But I never imagined that this trip would change my life forever. I arrived in Wadi al-Hilal, a remote desert town known for its breathtaking landscapes and ancient Bedouin traditions. It was meant to be a solo journey, an escape from the pressures of my job in Paris, from the expectations of my family, from the restlessness that had been gnawing at me for months. The first few days were exactly what I needed. I explored the souks, wandered through ancient ruins, and let the silence of the desert soothe me. But on the fourth evening, as the sun dipped behind the dunes, something, or rather, someone, shattered my peaceful solitude. I was sitting outside a small guest house, sipping on strong Arabic coffee, when I saw him. He was standing by the entrance, speaking in low tones to an older man in a white thobe. Even from a distance, he exuded an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and deep brown eyes that seemed to hold an entire world of secrets. Something about him sent a spark of curiosity through me. Then, as if he sensed my gaze, he turned, and our eyes met. A jolt of something unexplainable shot through me. His expression remained unreadable, his face impassive, but he held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary before returning to his conversation. I swallowed hard and looked away, pretending to be engrossed in my cup of coffee. But my mind was racing. Who was he? Why did that brief moment feel so intense? That night, unable to shake the image of the stranger from my mind, I took a walk through the marketplace. The town was quiet at this hour, the scent of spices lingering in the air, the flickering lanterns casting warm light against the sandstone walls. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with him. Up close, he was even more striking. His dark eyes locked onto mine with an unreadable expression, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "You are not from here," he finally said, his voice deep and deliberate. It wasn't a question. "No," I admitted, my throat dry. "I'm French, just visiting." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Louis." The way he said my name sent an unexpected shiver through me. I hadn't told him who I was. Before I could ask how he knew, he gave me a slight, knowing smile. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the maze of the marketplace. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. The night air was warm, carrying the scent of spices and sand, but my skin felt cold. I stood there, unmoving, my mind racing after him. The way he had said my name, the way his gaze had pierced through me, it left me shaken in a way I didn't understand. How had he known who I was? I turned my head in the direction he had disappeared, but he was gone. The marketplace was nearly empty now, the last few vendors packing up their goods, lanterns flickering under the breeze. A rational part of me told me to forget about him, to chalk it up to coincidence, but something about the encounter made that impossible. I should have returned to my guest house. Instead, my feet moved forward. I followed the path he had taken, my pulse quickening with every step. I didn't know what I was searching for, only that I couldn't let the night end like this. The streets grew quieter as I left the main square. The buildings here were older, their walls worn from time and sandstorms. I turned a corner and stopped. He was there. Standing beneath an archway, illuminated only by the moonlight, he looked like a painting. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his expression was unreadable. "You followed me," he said. I hesitated. I just wanted to know your name." A slow smirk played on his lips. Zaid. The name suited him. Strong, mysterious. It rolled off his tongue like a secret he wasn't sure he wanted to share. "How did you know mine?" I asked. He took a step closer. I could smell the hint of cedar and something deeper, leather, earth, something purely him. "This is a small town," he said simply. "A foreigner arrives, people notice." It made sense, but I wasn't convinced. There was something in his voice, in the way he studied me, that made me feel like he knew more than he was letting on. A heavy silence stretched between us, the kind that felt charged, thick with something unnamed. I could hear my own breathing, could feel the heat of his presence pressing against me, despite the space still between us. "I should go," I said, but I didn't move. Zaid's gaze flickered over my face, searching for something. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I should have left it there, gone back to my life, to my simple plans. But as I watched him disappear into the night for the second time, I knew I was already in too deep. The next morning, I couldn't shake him from my mind. I wandered through the souks, the vibrant colors and scents distracting me only briefly. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see him, but he was nowhere. It wasn't until late afternoon that fate decided otherwise. I had gone outside the town, taking a camel ride into the dunes. The desert stretched endlessly, silent and endless, the sun casting long golden shadows as it began its descent. I had never seen anything like it. The stillness, the beauty, it was overwhelming. The guide led the small group to a ridge where we could watch the sunset. I stepped away, craving a moment alone. I stood there, watching as the sky bled into deep oranges and purples, feeling small beneath its vastness. Then behind me, a voice. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned sharply. Zaid. He was standing just a few feet away, dressed in a simple white shirt and dark pants, blending effortlessly into the scenery. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I frowned. "I'm not alone." I gestured toward the group in the distance. He shook his head slightly, as if that wasn't the point. Then, after a beat, he said, "The desert keeps its secrets well. Be careful what you get lost in." His words sent a shiver down my spine. There was something in the way he said it, like he wasn't talking about the sand at all. I swallowed. "Are you always this cryptic?" A ghost of a smile. "Only with those who need a warning." A strange mix of frustration and intrigue twisted inside me. "And what exactly am I being warned about?" He held my gaze, his expression unreadable. Then, with a final glance at the horizon, he said, "Me." The sun dipped below the dunes, casting us both into twilight. My pulse pounded in my ears. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I should have walked away. Instead, I stood there, my breath uneven, my mind racing with everything his simple answer implied. Me. One word, heavy with meaning. A warning. A challenge. Or maybe something else entirely. The desert night settled around us, the last streaks of sunlight melting into deep purples and blues. The group I had come with was still gathered on the ridge, their voices distant. But here, where it was just the two of us, the world felt quieter, more dangerous. "You think you're a warning?" I finally asked, trying to sound unaffected. Zaid's gaze didn't waver. "I know I am." There was something unnerving about his certainty, something that made me want to step closer, even as every rational part of me told me to keep my distance. "I don't scare easily," I said, surprising even myself. The corner of his lips lifted in the faintest hint of amusement. "That's not always a good thing." A gust of wind swept between us, carrying the scent of dry earth and something faintly sweet. The desert felt alive around us, shifting, whispering. I should have left it at that. I should have turned and rejoined the others, let him keep whatever secret he was holding on to. But instead, I took a step forward. "Tell me then," I said. "What is it that makes you so dangerous?" Zaid inhaled sharply, as if he hadn't expected me to push. His gaze flickered to my lips for the briefest moment before he exhaled and looked away. "You ask too many questions, Lewis." My name again. The way he said it, low, deliberate, sent a shiver through me. "Maybe you just don't want to answer." His jaw tightened. For a long moment I thought he wouldn't, but then he turned toward the horizon, his voice quieter now. "There are things in this world that are better left unknown." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. This wasn't just an attempt at mystery. There was weight behind those words, something real. And yet, despite everything in his body language telling me to walk away, he wasn't leaving. Neither was I. A shout came from the ridge behind us, one of the guides calling us back. The moment broke. Zaid took a step back, his expression unreadable again. "Go, Lewis." Something in me resisted, but I turned, forcing my feet to move. I walked away, but I felt him watching me the entire time. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing against the backdrop of the desert, his gaze burning into mine, his words echoing in my head. "There are things in this world that are better left unknown." I wanted to let it go. I should let it go. But something about Zaid pulled at me like a tide, and I wasn't sure I wanted to fight it. The next morning I found myself back in the marketplace, half hoping, half dreading that I would run into him again. The streets were livelier now, filled with the scent of cardamom and saffron, the sounds of merchants calling out their prices. I wandered without a real destination, but my mind was somewhere else, on him. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, I felt it, his presence. Before I even saw him, I knew he was near. I turned, heart pounding, and there he was. Zaid stood at the entrance of a quiet alleyway, his gaze locked onto mine. Unlike last night, there was no hesitation this time. He lifted his hand slightly, a silent invitation. My breath caught. This was the moment. A choice. I could walk away now and pretend none of this ever happened. Or I could follow him and finally learn what it was he was hiding. My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I followed him into the shadows. The moment I stepped into the alleyway, the sounds of the bustling marketplace faded, swallowed by the narrow passage between the old sandstone buildings. The scent of spices and roasted almonds still lingered in the air, but here, in the dim light of the secluded street, everything felt different, more intimate, more dangerous. Zaid walked ahead of me, his pace unhurried, his posture rigid. The further we moved from the open streets, the more aware I became of my own heartbeat. Why was I following him? Every rational part of me screamed to turn back, to leave whatever this was alone. But I didn't. He stopped abruptly near an old wooden door, resting one hand against the frame before turning to face me. His gaze, always intense, held something else now. Hesitation, frustration, maybe even regret. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I let out a dry laugh. "You're the one who brought me here." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "That doesn't mean you should have followed." The way he said it sent a chill through me, but I had come too far to back down now. "What is this about, Zaid?" My voice was quieter than I intended. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair, his fingers lingering at the back of his neck. I had never seen him look uncertain before. "You ask too many questions," he muttered. "I get that a lot." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it disappeared just as quickly as it had come. Then, suddenly, he took a step closer, and my breath caught. His presence was overwhelming. The desert heat had nothing on the way my body reacted to him, like standing too close to a fire, knowing you should move back but unable to resist the warmth. "There are things you don't understand, Lewis," he said. His voice was lower now, more controlled. "And if you keep pushing, you'll end up in the middle of something you're not ready for." I should have been scared. Maybe I was. But more than anything, I was curious. I took a step closer, closing the space between us. "Then explain it to me." For a moment I thought he might. His lips parted, his gaze dropping ever so slightly to my mouth before flicking back to my eyes. My pulse hammered against my skin. Then, a noise. A loud crash echoed through the alleyway, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Zaid's expression changed instantly. Panic. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me back against the wall, pressing himself close, shielding me with his body. "Don't move," he whispered against my ear. I barely had time to process what was happening before a figure rushed past us, their footsteps pounding against the stone pavement. My breath hitched, my senses on high alert. Then, just as quickly as the figure had come, they were gone. Silence returned to the alleyway, but the tension remained. Zaid didn't move. Neither did I. I was hyper-aware of everything, the way his chest rose and fell against mine, the heat of his skin through his shirt, the scent of leather and spice clinging to him. My fingers twitched at my sides. If I moved even an inch, I would touch him. Slowly, too slowly, he pulled back, but not completely. His hand was still on my wrist, his thumb grazing my pulse point. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Zaid's eyes darkened. "Someone you don't want to know." My stomach clenched. "Zaid, what's going on?" He let go of me as if he suddenly realized he was still holding on. "I told you," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "Some things are better left unknown." And then, without another word, he disappeared into the night, leaving me breathless and full of questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. I didn't see Zaid for 2 days after that night in the alley. 2 long, restless days where my mind couldn't stop replaying everything. The way he had pressed me against the wall, the heat of his breath against my ear, the cryptic warning that left me drowning in more questions than answers, and the way he disappeared, like a ghost. I tried to convince myself it was for the best. I was a visitor in this town, nothing more. Whatever secrets Zaid was hiding weren't mine to uncover. I should just enjoy the rest of my trip and leave. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Because when night fell on the second day, and I found myself back in the marketplace, my heart pounding at the possibility of seeing him again, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just curious anymore. I wanted him. The souk was alive with movement, merchants calling out their final offers before closing for the night, the scent of cinnamon and roasted lamb lingering in the warm air. I wandered without a destination, my eyes scanning the crowd as if Zaid might materialize at any moment. And then, like some unseen force had willed it into existence, he was there. Leaning against a stone wall at the edge of the marketplace, arms crossed, watching me. I stopped in my tracks. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes tonight. A storm brewing beneath the surface. I took a step forward, but before I could speak, he pushed off the wall and started walking away. Not disappearing this time, leading me. My chest tightened as I followed him through the winding streets. He didn't look back, didn't speak, but I could feel the tension between us like an invisible thread pulling me toward him. We walked until the noise of the marketplace faded, until the streets turned quieter, emptier, until we reached a rooftop terrace, open to the night sky. Zaid stopped at the edge, looking out at the city below, the desert stretching beyond like an ocean of gold under the moonlight. I didn't realize how fast my heart was beating until I stepped beside him. "You disappeared," I finally said. "So did you," he replied without looking at me. I exhaled sharply. "I waited for you." Zaid's grip tightened on the ledge. His knuckles turned white. Something was wrong. I could feel it. "Zaid, I shouldn't have brought you into this," he said, his voice sharp, pained. "I told you to walk away." A cold chill ran through me. "But you knew I wouldn't." He turned to me then, and the intensity in his gaze stole my breath. "That's the problem." My chest ached with something I didn't want to name. "Then tell me what this is," I said, stepping closer. "Tell me why you pull me in and then push me away." He clenched his jaw, as if physically restraining himself. "Because I can't have this," he said, "and neither can you." The words cut deep, but they weren't enough to make me step back. Instead, I reached for him. My fingers brushed his wrist, just a whisper of a touch. But it was enough. Zaid snapped. Before I could process it, his hands were on me, gripping my face, and his mouth crashed into mine. The world vanished. Heat, desperation, a fire that had been simmering beneath the surface finally unleashed. Zaid kissed me like a man who had been starving for something he refused to admit he wanted. His hands were firm, rough, pulling me closer, as if he was afraid I might slip away. And God, I didn't want to. I wanted more. I pressed into him, my own hands finding his waist, anchoring myself in him. He let out a low sound, somewhere between frustration and surrender, and it sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, it was just this, just us. Then, he pulled away. Breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine, his hands still gripping my shirt like he wanted to push me away and pull me back at the same time. "This is a mistake," he whispered, voice raw. I was trembling. "Then why does it feel like the only real thing?" His eyes burned into mine, and for a second I thought he might kiss me again. Instead, he closed his eyes. And then, in a voice barely above a breath, he said, "Because I'm engaged." The world stopped.